I've opened a lot of old walls in my 20 years as a carpenter, but nothing prepared me for the child's drawing I found hidden in the Miller place, a chilling message from a past that refused to stay buried. The smell of an old house is a language all its own. It's not a bad smell, not like rot or mildew, but a dry, layered scent of ancient timber, dust from a dozen decades, and the faint, ghostly perfume of lives lived within its walls. I've been a carpenter for 20 years, and I can read a house's history just by breathing it in. This one, the old Miller place on Elm Street, smelled of baked bread, pipe tobacco, and something else. Something like old paper and forgotten secrets. The new owners, the Hendersons, were a young couple, all bright eyes and Pinterest boards. They wanted to convert the sprawling, unused attic into a sunny home office for her and a studio for him. It was a straightforward job. Insulate, drywall, run some new electrical, put in a couple of skylights, standard stuff. I'd done it 100 times. The attic was a cathedral of dust. Sunlight streamed through a single grimy porthole window, illuminating swirling galaxies of microscopic particles. Old trunks sat like sleeping giants, covered in tarps that crunched when you touched them. The air was still and warm, thick with the silence of the past. The first week was all prep, clearing out the junk, pulling up the old splintered floorboards, and mapping out the plan. It was during the second week when I started opening up the walls to check the integrity of the studs and run new wiring that my ordinary job took a very, very sharp turn. I was working on the north wall, the one that overlooked the gnarled oak tree in the backyard. It was original lath and plaster, a real pain to work with. I used a pry bar, gently working the old plaster away in big, dusty sheets. It crumbled into a fine white powder that coated my arms and the floor around me. Behind it, the wooden lath looked like the skeleton of some prehistoric beast. I knocked a section loose with my hammer, and it fell away, revealing the dark, hollow space between the studs. It's in these voids that you find the weird stuff. Mummified squirrels, old newspapers from the 40s used as insulation, a forgotten bottle of Prohibition-era whiskey if you're lucky. I shone my headlamp into the cavity, expecting to see nothing but more dust and the back of the exterior sheathing. But there was something else. It wasn't a bottle or a newspaper. It was flat, rectangular, and wedged tightly between two vertical studs, about halfway down the wall. It looked like a thick piece of cardboard or a folded-up portfolio. My curiosity, the thing that makes me love my job, sparked to life. I reached into the wall, my fingers brushing against a century of cobwebs. The object was stiff and cool to the touch. I had to wiggle it back and forth, careful not to tear whatever it was. It was lodged in there good, as if someone had deliberately sealed it in. Finally, with a soft shk, it came free. I pulled it out into the weak light of the attic. It was a single piece of thick, pulpy artist's paper, yellowed with age to the color of old ivory. It had been folded in half, and the crease was so deep it was almost worn through. My hands, calloused and smudged with plaster dust, felt clumsy holding something so delicate. I carefully unfolded it. My breath caught in my throat. It was a child's drawing. The colors were faded but still distinct, made with that waxy, unmistakable sheen of old crayons. It depicted a classic simple scene, a little house with a crooked chimney puffing out a swirl of smoke, a bright yellow sun with spiky rays in the top right corner, and a family of 4 stick figures standing in front. There was a tall father in a blue suit, a mother in a red dress with a perfect triangle skirt, a little boy holding a ball, and a slightly smaller girl with bright orange pigtails. They were all smiling these wide, simple, happy arc smiles. In the bottom left corner, in the shaky, earnest print of a young child, were the words, "Our happy family," and below that a name and a date. Lily, 1938. I smiled. For a moment it was just a charming, beautiful piece of history. A little time capsule left by a girl named Lily almost a century ago. What were the odds? I imagined her, maybe 7 or 8 years old, sitting on the floor of this very attic, carefully drawing her family. Maybe her dad was a contractor too, and she'd slipped it into the wall when he wasn't looking. a secret message to the future. I felt a strange connection to this long-gone child, a shared moment across the chasm of time. I ran my thumb gently over the date. 1938. The world was on the brink of a terrible war, but here in this attic, a little girl named Lily was drawing her happy family. I was about to fold it back up to show the Hendersons this wonderful piece of their home soul, when I noticed something. The smiles. I leaned in closer, my headlamp casting a focused beam on the paper. The smiles weren't happy. They were too wide, stretched from ear to ear in a way that felt unnatural. The black crayon lines were pressed so hard into the paper that they'd left deep grooves. It wasn't the joyful expression of a family. It was a grotesque parody of one. They looked less like they were smiling and more like they were screaming. A shiver, cold and sudden, traced a path down my spine. The air in the attic suddenly felt heavy, oppressive. My eyes darted around the drawing, looking for more details, and that's when I saw him. He was in the background, partially hidden behind the house. I hadn't noticed him at first because he was drawn in a faint gray crayon, almost blending into the aged paper. He was tall, impossibly tall and thin, like a stretched-out shadow. He wore a black suit and a hat, but he had no face. Where his features should have been, there was only a blank, smooth oval. One of his long, spindly arms was extended, and his hand, a tangle of long, sharp fingers, rested on the father's shoulder. He wasn't part of the family portrait. He was observing it, controlling it. My heart started to thump a heavy, dull rhythm against my ribs. This wasn't a happy drawing. This was a nightmare. Who was this faceless man? Why did Lily draw him? The charm of the discovery evaporated, replaced by a thick, cloying sense of dread. The silence of the attic was no longer peaceful. It was watchful. I felt an overwhelming urge to put the drawing back, to seal the wall up and pretend I'd never found anything. I turned the fragile paper over in my trembling hands, hoping for, I don't know what, an explanation, a clue. The back was mostly blank, covered in the same yellow-brown patina of age. But there, in the very center, was another message. It wasn't in the same childish print as the front. This was a frantic, desperate scribble, written in faint pencil, so light it was almost invisible. The handwriting was different, older. It was just one sentence. I held it up to my headlamp, my breath fogging in the cool air, and read the words that would turn my blood to ice. He's not a drawing, he's in the wall. And as the last word registered in my brain, I heard it. From deep inside the dark, hollow cavity of the wall, right in front of me, a sound. A soft, dry, scratching sound. Scrap! Scrap! It wasn't a mouse or a rat. It was slow, deliberate, and it was getting closer. My muscles seized. Every instinct, every primal circuit in my brain screamed, "Danger!" I was frozen, a statue of dusty denim and cold sweat, my headlamp beam fixed on the dark rectangle of the hole in the wall. The drawing felt like it was burning a hole in my hand. Scrape, scrape. It was the sound of a fingernail dragging slowly, deliberately, across dry wood. It was coming from deeper inside the wall, moving parallel to the floor, moving towards me. My mind raced, desperately trying to build a dam of logic against the tide of fear. A rat. It had to be a rat. A big one, maybe, caught between the studs. Or a branch from the old oak tree scraping against the exterior sheathing in the wind. But there was no wind today. The attic was still and suffocatingly silent, except for that one impossible sound. And a rat wouldn't scrape like that. Their sounds are skittering, frantic. This was methodical, patient. I held my breath, listening. The scraping stopped. The silence that rushed in to fill the void was somehow worse. It was thick with anticipation. I lowered the drawing, placing it carefully on a stack of floorboards behind me, my eyes never leaving the hole. My rational Carpenter's mind took over for a split second. Check the source. Identify the problem. Fix it. That's what I do. With a hand that trembled slightly, I reached for the high-powered flashlight I keep clipped to my tool belt. Its beam cut through the darkness with much more authority than my headlamp. I angled it into the hole, sweeping the light across the rough-hewn wood of the studs and the dusty space between. I could see old knob and tube wiring, now disconnected, hanging like dead vines. I saw a thick copper pipe for the second-floor radiator running vertically. I saw dust bunnies the size of small animals. I saw nothing else. Nothing. No rat, no squirrel, no sign of what could have made that noise. I leaned closer, my face almost pressed against the crumbling plaster, and peered down into the cavity. The scratching had sounded like it was just a few feet to my left. I swung the beam in that direction. Nothing. Just an empty, dusty void stretching into the darkness of the wall. "Okay, get a grip, Dave," I muttered to myself, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. "You're tired. Your mind's playing tricks on you." I pulled back from the wall, forcing a deep breath into my tight chest. It tasted of dust and fear. I glanced back at the drawing. Our happy family. Lily. 1938. The grotesque screaming smiles. The tall, faceless man with his long fingers resting on the father's shoulder. And those words on the back, scrawled like a final, desperate warning. He's not a drawing. He's in the wall. My mind wasn't playing tricks on me. A little girl named Lily had been terrified of something in this house, something she believed lived inside the walls, and I had just heard it. I needed to talk to someone. I needed another voice, a dose of reality from the outside world. I fumbled for my phone, my dusty fingers smudging the screen. 1 bar of service. Of course. I dialed Mr. Henderson. It rang once, twice, then a crackle of static before his cheerful voice cut through. "Dave, how's the Cathedral of Dust treating you?" he asked. Hey, Mr. Henderson, it's going," I stammered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Listen, I found something. Kind of a weird question, but when you bought the place, did the previous owners mention anything strange about the house's history? Any stories?" There was a pause. Strange how? Like a leaky roof or termites. The inspector gave it a pretty clean bill of health for a house this age. "No, not like that. Like stories, lore. Anything about the family who lived here back in the 30s? The Millers?" "Can't say they did," he said, his voice still breezy. "Just that it was a big family, lived here for ages. Why, did you find some old treasure? Gold bars? A secret wine cellar?" He laughed. How could I possibly explain? "Yeah, I found a creepy drawing from a terrified little girl, and I think there's a monster in your wall. I'd be off the job and in a padded room by sundown." "No, nothing like that," I said, my voice flat with defeat. "Just an old kid's drawing, from 1938. Got me curious is all." "Oh, cool. A little piece of history. Hey, listen, Amy's calling me on the other line. Just hang on to it. We'd love to see it when we get back tonight. Everything else going okay?" The scraping started again. It was louder this time, closer. Not a scrape anymore. It was a soft rhythmic tap, 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 like someone was lightly knocking on the inside of the wall, right next to my head. My blood ran cold. Mr. Henderson was still talking on the other end of the line, his voice a distant, tinny sound from another world. "Dave? You there?" Tap, tap, tap. It was just on the other side of the plaster. I could almost feel the vibration through the air. I have to go," I whispered into the phone and hung up before he could reply. I scrambled backwards, away from the wall, kicking up clouds of dust. My heart was a wild drum against my ribs. I stared at the spot where the sound was coming from. It was a blank section of plaster, 3 feet to the left of the hole I'd made. Who was tapping? What was in there? I should have left. I should have packed my tools, walked out the door, and never looked back. But I couldn't. It was my job site. And more than that. What about the Hendersons? What about this young couple who had poured their life savings into this house? I couldn't just abandon them to this. And what about Lily? A wave of protectiveness for this girl I'd never met washed over me. Her warning had been sealed away for 80 years, and I was the one who had found it. I felt a responsibility. Taking my hammer, I crept back towards the wall. The tapping had stopped again, as if it knew I was approaching. "Who's there?" "Bulky," I called out, my voice cracking. The only answer was the echo of my own foolish question in the vast, silent space. I decided to open another hole, right where I'd heard the tapping. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely grip the hammer. I swung, and the head hit the old plaster with a dull thud, sending a web of cracks across the surface. I hit it again, harder this time, and a large chunk broke away, falling to the floor with a dusty crash. I shone my light into the new opening, more of the same, studs, wires, insulation, dust. But this time something else caught the light. It wasn't wedged between the studs like the drawing. It was sitting on a horizontal crosspiece of wood, a little makeshift shelf inside the wall. It was a small book, bound in cheap, faded blue leather, no bigger than my palm. A diary. My breath hitched. With a sense of reverence and dread, I reached into the wall. The leather was brittle, and the little metal clasp on the side was rusted shut. I gently worked it open. On the inside cover, in the same looping, childish print as the drawing, was the name, Lily Miller. The first several pages were exactly what you'd expect from a little girl's diary in 1938. Entries about a birthday party, a new dress from Sears, her frustration with her brother Tommy for breaking her favorite doll. It was so normal, so innocent. It made what came next even more horrifying. I flipped to an entry dated October 12, 1938. The handwriting changed here. It was still Lily's, but it was messier, more frantic. Daddy is working in the walls again. He is adding a new room for Tommy. There is so much hammering. The hammering makes the new man angry. I hear him scratching when the hammering stops. He doesn't like the noise. The new man. My fingers trembled as I turned the page. October 14th, 1938. I saw him today. He is not a man. He is a shadow with a suit on. He came out of the wall when Mommy was downstairs. He has no face, but I know he was looking at me. He put his long finger on his mouth, but he has no mouth. He wants me to be quiet. I felt sick. I slammed the diary shut, my mind reeling. A shadow in a suit? Came out of the wall? This was the delusion of a child. It had to be. A fantasy to cope with the scary noises of construction. But it felt so real. And it explained the drawing. It explained everything. I had to read the last entry. I knew I had to. I opened the diary again, my hands slick with sweat. The last page was smudged, the pencil pressed so hard into the paper it had nearly torn through. It was dated October 19th, 1938. Daddy is finished. The wall is all closed up now. But the new man is not gone. I can hear him breathing in there. He whispered my name. He said he likes it in the dark. He said he will wait. He told me what he does to families who are not happy. He makes them smile. He makes them smile forever so they can be a happy family. Daddy is yelling at Mommy again. They are so loud. The new man doesn't like the noise. He's scratching again. He wants to come out and make them quiet. A final shaky sentence was crammed in at the bottom of the page, written so faintly it was almost illegible, as if she wrote it in the dark. He can unbend. He can unbend. The words hung in the dusty air, nonsensical and yet filled with a chilling, abstract horror. What does that even mean? I imagined something folded, compressed, packed into a space far too small for it. Something waiting. The diary felt impossibly heavy in my hands, a testament to a child's terror that had been fermenting in the dark for 80 years. Lily Miller wasn't imagining things. She was documenting them. I stood there for a long moment, the attic's silence pressing in on me, broken only by the frantic pounding of my own heart. The rational part of my brain was in a full-scale retreat. This was insane. Houses settle, old pipes groan, rodents scratch. There are 1,000 logical explanations for every bump and scrape in a century-old house, but none of them could explain the drawing. None of them could explain Lily's diary. None of them could explain the cold, hard certainty that was taking root in my gut. I was not alone up here. My gaze was drawn back to the first hole I'd made in the wall, the spot where I'd found the drawing. It seemed darker now, a gaping maw leading into the house's hidden anatomy. The scratching had stopped. The tapping was gone. The silence was absolute. And that was the most terrifying thing of all. It was the silence of a predator that has stopped rustling in the undergrowth because it knows you've seen it. It's the silence of pure, patient waiting. I had to get out. My work for the day was done. More than done. I started gathering my tools with frantic, jerky movements, my head on a swivel. Every creak of a floorboard, every distant groan of the old house settling, sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through my system. I shoved my hammer into its loop, grabbed my drill, and practically threw my pry bar into my toolbox. The drawing and the diary, however, I couldn't leave. They felt like evidence. They felt like a responsibility. I carefully tucked them into the front pocket of my work jacket, the brittle paper and cracked leather pressing against my chest like a talisman. As I snapped my toolbox shut, a floorboard creaked upstairs. Except there was no upstairs. I was in the attic, the highest point of the house. The sound had come from the roof. I froze, listening, my ears straining. Creak. It was a slow, dragging sound, the sound of weight being shifted on the old asphalt shingles directly above my head. It was heavy, too heavy for a squirrel or a bird. It sounded like a person, walking slowly across the peak of the roof. My blood turned to ice. It was the middle of the afternoon on a quiet residential street. Who would be on the roof? A cold knot of dread tightened in my stomach as Lily's words echoed in my mind. He came out of the wall. The dragging sound continued, moving from the peak of the roof down the slope, towards the edge right above the attic's porthole window. My eyes shot to the grimy circle of glass. It offered a distorted, cloudy view of the bright blue sky. I held my breath, watching, waiting. The dragging stopped right above the window. For a few seconds there was nothing. Then a shadow fell over the window, plunging the attic into a dim, murky twilight. It wasn't the fleeting shadow of a passing cloud. It was solid, definite, and it stayed there, eclipsing the sun. Something was standing on the roof, right outside the window, blocking the light. And then I saw the fingers. 5 of them. They curled slowly, deliberately, over the top edge of the window frame. They were unnaturally long and thin, like the pale roots of a dead tree. The joints bent at odd, sharp angles. They were gray and waxy, the color of something that had never seen the sun. They weren't the fingers of a man. They were the fingers from the drawing. I was paralyzed. I couldn't scream. I couldn't run. My feet were nailed to the floor. My entire world had shrunk to that grimy porthole window and the horrific, impossible things that were curling over the frame. The thing outside shifted, and a face descended into view. It was just as Lily had drawn it. A smooth, pale oval, devoid of eyes, nose, or mouth. A complete and terrifying blank. It tilted its head, a slow, inquisitive gesture that was sickeningly human. Though it had no eyes, I felt it looking at me. It saw me. It knew I was there. This faceless thing, this shadow in a suit from a child's 80-year-old nightmare, was real. And it was trying to get in. That's what broke the spell. The sheer animal instinct for survival. I let out a choked, ragged gasp and stumbled backward, tripping over my own toolbox and crashing to the floor. The impact sent a shockwave of pain up my spine, but it got me moving. I scrambled away on my hands and knees, crab-walking backward towards the attic stairs, my eyes still locked on the window. The blank face pressed itself against the glass. A faint, cloudy smear of condensation appeared on the pane where a mouth should have been. A low sound vibrated through the attic, a deep, guttural hum that seemed to come from the very timbers of the house. It was the sound of a voice without a mouth, a wordless, hungry thrum of ancient malice. I found the opening to the stairs and practically fell down them, my heavy boots thudding on the wooden steps. I didn't bother folding the attic ladder. I just slammed the hatch shut, the old metal lock groaning as it caught. I stood there in the upstairs hallway, chest heaving, listening. The humming had stopped, but now there was a new sound. A faint, sharp tink, tink, tink. It was the sound of one of those long, sharp fingernails tapping on the glass of the attic window. I didn't wait to hear more. I flew down the main staircase, burst through the front door into the blinding afternoon sun, and didn't stop running until I was on the other side of the street, fumbling for my car keys. My hands were shaking so badly it took me 3 tries to get the key in the ignition. I threw the car in reverse, tires squealing on the asphalt, and peeled away from the old Miller house, my eyes locked on the rearview mirror. The house just sat there, looking perfectly normal, a charming Victorian on a quiet, sun-drenched street. The gnarled oak tree swayed gently in a non-existent breeze. There was nothing on the roof, nothing in the windows. It looked like any other house, but I knew better. I drove for 10 minutes, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, before I finally pulled over in the parking lot of a hardware store, the only place I could think of that felt safe and normal. I sat there for a long time, the engine ticking, trying to get my breathing under control. I pulled the diary and the drawing from my jacket. My hands were still trembling. It was real. I wasn't crazy. I had found Lily's warning, and I had met the thing she was warning against. What was I going to do? I couldn't go back there. Not ever. But the Hendersons, they were going to move into that house. They were going to sleep there. They wanted to turn that attic into a sunny home office. I pictured Amy Henderson sitting at her desk, working late, while that thing unbent itself from the walls behind her. The thought made me physically ill. I had to warn them. But how? What could I possibly say? I knew how I'd sound. I'd be the crazy contractor who got spooked by an old house. They'd fire me, hire someone else, and the new guy would patch up the holes in the wall, sealing the secret back in for another 80 years. Nothing would change. The thing would still be there, waiting. My eyes fell on the last page of the diary. He told me what he does to families who are not happy. He makes them smile. He makes them smile forever. And then the other line. Daddy is yelling at Mommy again. An idea, cold and terrible, began to form in my mind. The thing, whatever it was, seemed to be drawn to conflict, to unhappiness. Lily said it didn't like the noise of her parents fighting. Maybe that was the key. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Mr. Henderson. "Hey Dave, everything okay? You cut out on me. Call me when you get a chance." I stared at the phone, my heart pounding a new, frantic rhythm. I knew what I had to do. It was a crazy, desperate, and incredibly dangerous plan. But it was the only one I had. I needed to get back into that house, but not alone. And not just to work. I needed to find out what happened to the Millers. I needed to find out what this thing was, and if there was any way to get rid of it. I started the car and drove, not home, but to the town's historical society. I spent the next few hours digging through dusty archives, old newspapers on microfilm, and property records, and I found them. The Miller family. A photo from a 1937 town picnic showed a man, a woman, and 2 young children, a boy and a girl. Lily. She looked just as I'd imagined, pigtails and all, but it was the last record I found that made my stomach drop. A newspaper clipping from the local Gazette, dated November 2nd, 1938. The headline was stark and brutal. Family of 4 found in Elm Street home. The article was short on details. It said the Miller's father, mother, son Tommy, and daughter Lily had been discovered by a relative. The police were calling it a tragedy, but the cause of death was inconclusive. The part that made my hair stand on end was the final, cryptic sentence, a quote from the police chief at the time. "The only thing I can say for sure," the chief was quoted, "is that when we found them, they were all smiling." The black and white words on the microfilm swam before my eyes. They were all smiling. The grotesque, stretched smiles from Lily's drawing weren't a child's exaggeration. They were a portrait of the end. The faceless man didn't just terrorize them. He'd made his awful promise come true. He had made them a happy family. Forever. I left the Historical Society in a daze, the setting sun casting long, ominous shadows across the street. My crazy plan from earlier now felt like the only possible path forward. I couldn't let the Hendersons become the next chapter in that house's gruesome history. Knowledge was the only weapon I had. I needed to know what I was facing, and the only place to find that answer was back in the belly of the beast. I called Mr. Henderson. My voice, to my surprise, was calm and steady. It was the calmness that comes after the peak of fear, when resolve hardens into something cold and solid. "Mr. Henderson, it's Dave." I'm sorry about before. My phone died. Listen, I need to get back into the house tonight. I've been looking at the wiring schematics for the attic, and there's a junction box inside that north wall that's not on the blueprint. Given the age of the house, I'm worried it might be a fire hazard. I won't sleep right until I've checked it out. It was a plausible lie, rooted in the genuine anxieties of any old house owner. Oh, wow, yeah, of course, he said, concern in his voice. We're just grabbing dinner now, but the key is still under the loose brick by the back steps. Just let yourself in. And Dave, thanks. Seriously, that's really going above and beyond. Just doing my job, I said, the words tasting like ash. Just want to make sure your house is safe. Night had fallen by the time I pulled up to Elm Street. The house looked even more imposing in the dark, a hulking silhouette against a starless sky. I didn't park out front. I left my truck a block away and walked, my heavy-duty flashlight in one hand and a crowbar in the other. I wasn't going up there to do carpentry. I let myself in through the back. The house was silent, but it was a different kind of silence now. It felt heavy, expectant. Every creak of the floorboards under my boots sounded like a gunshot. I didn't turn on any lights. I didn't want it to know I was there, not yet. Using only my flashlight beam, I made my way to the second-floor hallway and pulled down the attic stairs. The air that wafted down was cold, colder than it should have been, and carried that same faint, dry scent of old paper and secrets. I took a deep breath, gripped the crowbar tighter, and ascended into the darkness. My flashlight beam cut through the black, illuminating the swirling dust. The holes I'd made in the wall were like dark, accusing eyes. I walked over to the north wall, my heart hammering against my ribs. I placed the crowbar on the floor and pulled Lily's drawing and diary from my jacket. I had to understand. He can unbend. What did she mean? I stood before the hole where I'd found the diary, shining my light deep into the cavity. It was just a space between studs, maybe 4 feet high and 16 inches wide. Nothing could fit in there. Not a person, not even a child. It was too narrow, too shallow. But what if it wasn't a person? Lily called him a shadow. What if he could compress, fold? He doesn't like the noise. That was my key, my terrible, desperate gambit. I took out my phone and found a sound file I had downloaded, a recording of a loud, vicious argument. It was just actors, but in the dead silence of that attic it would be more than enough. I placed the phone on the floor near the wall, took a deep breath, and hit play. The attic was suddenly filled with the sound of shouting. A man and a woman screaming at each other, voices dripping with anger and resentment. The noise was jarring, profane. It felt like a violation of the house's ancient silence. I backed away from the wall, my flashlight beam fixed on the hole, the crowbar held in front of me like a shield. For a few seconds, nothing happened. The recorded argument raged on. Then I heard it. A low groan. It didn't come from the hole I'd made, but from the entire wall. It was the sound of old timber under immense, unnatural pressure. A fine shower of plaster dust sifted down from the ceiling. Crack! A horizontal crack shot across the plaster, racing from one end of the wall to the other. The shouting from my phone continued, fueling whatever was happening. The groan intensified, becoming a deep, tearing sound, like a giant tree being ripped apart from the inside. This was it. Lily's warning made a terrifying kind of sense. The faceless man wasn't in the wall. He was the wall, or part of it. A creature that could fold itself into the very structure of the house, becoming dormant, indistinguishable from the wood and plaster around it. Waiting. Unhappiness, anger, loud noises. They woke it up. They called it out. The entire section of the north wall began to bulge outward. The plaster cracked and spiderwebbed, raining down in chunks. The wooden lath behind it snapped like toothpicks. I could see something dark moving behind the failing structure, something impossibly large unfurling in the narrow space. With a final, explosive crunch, the wall gave way. Studs, plaster, and lath blew inward, and the thing that had been inside for 80 years unbent itself into the attic. It was tall, taller than a man. Its limbs were long and jointed like an insect's, its body a shifting, two-dimensional column of what looked like solidified shadow. It wore the tattered remnants of a 1930s suit, the fabric clinging to its impossible form. And its head was a smooth, white, featureless oval that seemed to absorb the light from my flashlight. It unfolded itself to its full height, its head scraping the rafters, and the recorded argument from my phone abruptly cut to static, and then died. Silence. The thing tilted its blank head, that same curious, sickening gesture I'd seen at the window. It had no eyes, but I felt its ancient, hungry gaze sweep over me. I was frozen, my mind screaming, but my body refusing to obey. This was a creature of quiet places and forgotten corners, a parasite that fed on misery. And I had just rung the dinner bell. It took a step. Its foot, a pointed amalgam of shadow and dust, made no sound on the wooden floor. Its long, spindly arm began to rise, the waxy gray fingers uncurling. I knew what it wanted. It wanted to make me quiet, to make me smile. My terror finally broke through my paralysis. I screamed, a raw, primal sound, and swung the crowbar with all my might. The heavy steel bar connected with its torso. There was no satisfying thud of impact. It was like hitting a bale of dust and cobwebs. The crowbar passed through its form with a dry, rustling sound, and the creature didn't even flinch. It just reformed the space I had violated, the shadows flowing back together like smoke. It was insubstantial. How do you fight something you can't hit? It took another silent step, closer now. I could smell it, the dry, cloying scent of ancient dust, of graves, of utter decay. Its long arm reached for me. My mind was racing. Lily's drawing. Lily's diary. She hadn't left me a weapon. She'd left me a warning. But maybe there was more. He came out of the wall. How do you get him back in? My eyes darted around the attic, lit by the frantic, bouncing beam of my flashlight. I saw the skylights the Hendersons had wanted. I saw the old chimney stack made of brick. I saw the single porthole window. The window he'd looked through. The window that let in the sun. He said he likes it in the dark. It was a long shot, a desperate, insane hope, but it was all I had. The creature's long fingers were inches from my face. I threw myself to the side, rolling across the dusty floor. The thing turned, its movements slow but deliberate, like a nightmare unfolding in slow motion. I scrambled to my feet and sprinted for the far side of the attic, where I'd left my toolbox. I ripped it open, my hands searching for my biggest, heaviest hammer. The creature was coming for me, gliding across the floor like a wisp of smoke. I found my framing hammer, gripped its handle, and ran, not away from the thing, but towards the porthole window. It was the only source of natural light, my only hope. The window was old, the glass thick and warped. The frame was painted shut. The faceless thing was almost upon me. With a desperate roar, I swung the hammer. The glass didn't just break. It exploded outward in a shower of glittering shards, letting in the cool night air and the faint, silvery light of a crescent moon. The creature stopped. It was only 10 feet away, but it stopped dead. It raised a hand, not to attack me, but to shield its blank face, as if the faint moonlight was a physical blow. A low, hissing sound emanated from it, like air leaking from a punctured tire. It took a hesitant step backward, away from the window, away from the light. It worked. It was a creature of darkness, of sealed-up spaces. Light was poison to it. But the moonlight wasn't enough. It was weak, and the thing was already starting to adapt, its shadowy form solidifying again. I needed more. I needed the sun. I looked at my watch. It was almost 5 a.m. Sunrise was less than an hour away. I had to hold it off. I had to keep it here, in the attic, until the sun came up. What followed was the longest hour of my life. It was a desperate dance of terror in the dusty attic. I kept the hole in the window between me and it. It would glide towards me from the shadows, and I would shine my high-powered flashlight beam directly at its featureless face. It would recoil with that horrible hissing sound, retreating into the darker corners. My flashlight became my sword and shield. The batteries were my lifeline. Twice it tried to get back into the wall, its form compressing, folding, trying to pour itself back into the hole it had made. Both times I drove it back with the beam of light, forcing it out into the open. It was a battle of wills, a modern man with a battery-powered light against a creature from a forgotten time. Finally, as the batteries in my flashlight began to flicker and die, I saw it. A faint, pale gray glow began to illuminate the edges of the broken window. Dawn. The creature seemed to feel it, too. A new sense of urgency entered its movements. It gave up on me and surged towards the broken wall, desperate to get back into the darkness before the sun arrived. Its form flattened, becoming a true two-dimensional shadow as it began to flow back into the space between the studs. "Oh, no, you don't," I gasped, my voice raw. I ran to my toolbox, grabbed the biggest can of expanding foam insulation I had, and sprinted for the wall. The creature was halfway inside, its shadowy form dissolving back into the house's structure. I jammed the nozzle of the can deep into the hole and pulled the trigger. The foam erupted into the cavity, a thick, bubbling chemical substance. The creature let out a silent, wrenching scream that I felt in my bones more than heard with my ears. Its shadowy form thrashed and contorted as the foam expanded, filling every crack and crevice, surrounding it, trapping it. The hissing was horrific, a sound of ancient evil being suffocated by modern chemistry. At that exact moment, the first brilliant rays of the morning sun streamed through the broken window, cutting a golden swathe through the dusty attic. The light hit the part of the creature that was still exposed. It didn't burn. It just unraveled. The shadows that made up its form seemed to fray at the edges, dissolving like smoke, turning into nothing more than dust motes dancing in the sunbeam. I kept spraying the foam, emptying the entire can into the wall until it was a solid, impenetrable block. The hissing faded. The thrashing stopped. It was over. I stood there for a long time, chest heaving, covered in dust and plaster, watching the sun fill the attic with clean, honest light. The space didn't feel evil anymore. It just felt old. When the Hendersons arrived an hour later, they found me sitting on their front steps, exhausted. They saw the destroyed wall, the broken window, and the hardened foam. I told them a half-truth. I said I'd found a massive ancient wasp's nest in the wall, that they'd swarmed me, and I'd panicked. I'd pay for all the damages, of course. They were shocked, but relieved that's all it was. They even thanked me for being so thorough. I finished the job. I rebuilt the north wall, but I did it differently. I filled the entire cavity with concrete before sealing it up with new drywall. And I installed the biggest skylights you've ever seen. I made that attic the brightest, sunniest room in the entire state. There would be no more dark corners in that house. I kept Lily's drawing and her diary. Sometimes late at night I take them out. I look at the drawing of the smiling family and the faceless man, and I read the terrified words of a little girl from 1938. She left a warning, and for some reason I was the one who was meant to find it. I was the one who got to finish the job her father started. I sealed the wall, and this time I made sure nothing inside would ever get out again. The house on Elm Street is quiet now, and I intend to keep it that way.